Welcome to another broadcast of We're All Here Together. Today we are exploring the question, am I a bad person? Which is something that a surprising amount of people ask themselves privately. And how do I know? Well, because I have been blessed. Thanks for coming back over to this room. I was in another room and I was chattering quite excitedly, and I needed to tighten it up. It's almost like somebody came over to see a child, and the child was like, oh, and like running through the house, just pointing out everything. Almost got myself all swirled up again. Okay, so am I a bad person? I was saying people ask themselves this privately. How do I know if it's a private question? Because I have been blessed to be invited into people's minds, lives, and hearts. And in addition to that, you can look up what people Google, and people be Googling this question. They want to know. And I think there's something beautiful about that, right? To even be considering that question, and yet is that even the right question? So today we're going to unpack it as best we can so that you walk away knowing if you are or are not a good person. Spoiler alert, you're fine. But it is helpful sometimes to be able to see the reasons or come to the reasons yourself why that's true. So this week I've been drawing a lot of lines to make space for two different sides of an experience: the side that's real, the side that is unreal. And this practice is really to validate the experience that you're having, the things that you're thinking and feeling, because if you don't do that, you can't go anywhere. It really starts here, and here is with all that is, and often what is can be in contrast to what you think it could be or should be. And so you say, no, I know better. I'm not mad. I'm not sad. I get it. But if you're mad or you're sad, like, you're mad or you're sad now. And it is a lot of the things we're looking at too on this split line demonstration is that, paradoxically, things are often both. The idea that things are either or is an idea, and that comes from thinking, and all thinking is unreal, meaning you can only think what you can't think accurately, because as soon as you put stuff in words, you lose it. So, am I a bad person? What's real, what's unreal? There's stuff you do or stuff you did that hurt or could hurt others. And then there's your interps of it, your interpretation of the stuff that you did or the stuff that you do. And let's be real here. If you're doing stuff that you know is harmful, let's just take a few deep breaths right now. And you might include yourself in the question of, like, if you're causing harm to yourself, you might include that in your inquiry of, am I a bad person? Being able to see, like, I'm not taking full care of myself. But right now we're just going to breathe. And why are we doing that? To make space for you to acknowledge that you're acknowledging that you might be doing things that are harmful to yourself or others. And see, I'm not scared of you. What's wild is that we all are. What? We all are. How? Because, man, I'm holding paper right now that probably killed some trees, and I moved through a bunch of paper. And doesn't that impact the oxygen that's available? Doesn't that impact the ecosystems that support, this delicate balance of life on Earth? Oh shit, is my consumerism harmful to others? Am I a bad person? So this is the stuff you do. See what I'm saying? Like, there's a component of things that's real, and there's a component of part of how we interpret it. And so what's real here is that I am using resources in a disposable way, and that actually is harmful to others. am I a bad person? And I think that's what's like kind of cool about this question, is that there are so many ways to use it. For example, I had said that you might use it if you are aware that you're not taking care of yourself the full way. I'm not eating healthy. I'm not using my gifts. Am I a bad person? So again, there's the stuff you do or did, and then there's the interpretation of it. And in the iteration, in the riff of the question, where you're acknowledging that you aren't taking care of yourself, that is harmful to others. How, why, etc. Because we're all one body. You are in charge of your cell. I'm in charge of my cell. The cells operate together. If you're not fully taking care of yourself at an emotional level, physical level, financial level, etc., you're harmful to others. So right now, basically, if you've been following along, what I've said is we're all poisoning the environment, and because we're not taking perfect care of each other, we're all bad people. Don't worry, I'm gonna land it though. And so, okay, what I'm hoping to demonstrate, or I guess what I'm watching be demonstrated, is that you can take anything and make it anything. And that's what the mind does. Yeah, I'm saying you're a bad person. I'm saying us on social media right now. We're all, because we're not out there planning food right now. Are we bad people? You know, see what I'm saying? Like, it's so crazy. And I think that it is the magnitude of that type of awareness that prevents us even stepping into it the whole way, because fucks, what will we find? And I was thinking about that the other day, where I'm pretty sure people love each other and they really care, and if they could help, they would help. And yet when we look at the magnitude, and I guess that's a word of the week too, of the amount of suffering, it's like why it's like, why even start? You know, how can you even help? It's like too big, you know, it's the whole why, it's almost like you give up before you start because it's so big. And what I'm hoping to do in this presentation is take this the whole way home to say, like, no, you're a human. Like, there's all of those things I've done thus far are interpretations of what is, when previously I said you can't think about what is, you have no idea. And also, we are not this. So from what I can tell, life is moving through us as us. We are expressions of life. I was talking either in this broadcast or the one prior about how we are cells within the same body. Life's body. Life is doing this. And life includes some element of momentum where you kind of like step into the stream that's already moving. And all of us sort of stepped into a stream that had elements of disposable thinking, consumerist thinking, separate thinking. And so we matched and moved with the stream, of which is life. And therefore, it's kind of like I did a presentation a while ago that talked about, can you really be responsible for, it was called responsibility, and it was basically saying you aren't responsible for how you learned to act in ways that are a little bit more whack, but it is your responsibility to clean it up. And that's kind of what I think we're doing as a collective body right now, where we're in this river where there are things that are happening that aren't quite what they seem and aren't quite supportive of people individually and collectively. And it isn't our responsibility that we're existing in a consumer, in a disposable world, but it is our responsibility to acknowledge it And you can only do that if you're willing to accept your role in it, but not accept it in a way that you think that you're a bad person. Because if you think that, you pinch yourself off from all that is in a way that you can't really do anything about it anyhow. So going back to the paradox where you sort of say like, well, it isn't and it isn't. So it's like you are and you aren't. And none of it matters. I did not see this. I'll be real. When I sat down with my paper today, I did not see that. The first stop on this tour was, behold, we are all bad people. Is our way of life victim to the way we treat ourselves? Is our way of life victim to the way we treat ourselves? Yes, I think that's an interesting way to put it, Grant. And hey, and I think that, yes, as within, so without. And it is our thinking, really, that generates these conditions. And yet you will think that it's the conditions that generate the thinking. We are creating the world at all times through our interpretation of it. Your interpretation informs your drop-down menu, what you can choose from in your responses. You think you're free. You think, and like we are, but you think like, oh, look, I can make all of these choices. Look at all the choices I can choose from. But the choices that you see on the table have already been filtered several times over based on your beliefs and your expectations. And so when we're looking at free will, are you then? If your drop-down menu has already been filtered, especially by the river that you found yourself in when you arrived. Oh man, sorry, you gotta bear with me because again, not really where I thought this convo was going, but I'm gonna trust it. So, the question, am I a bad person? So first, we started out by saying like, hey look, for everything that we're looking at, there are generally two sides of it. There is the side of it that's like, well, this is like what is, and then you have your interpretation of what is, and your interpretation of what is everything. It's everything. And our interpretation is learned. And most of our interpretation comes from a place of fear and pain and separation and powerlessness. Basically that we have forgotten who we really are and what we're really connected to. So when we look, and it honestly, in my personal journey, it took me going the whole way to the awareness of like, oh fucks, like we're all divine, for me to have the balls to go look at the stuff I was doing. Because our conditioning, our mental conditioning is so strong, and you have to be a good person. And yet there are all of these like traps and tripwires set up in our own culture that prevent you from ever being able to say, I am a good person, at least in full awareness. Because again, if you remember what I said, based on how we're all living, we're all bad people. We are all harming each other in our world. So even if you are going to church, even if you're paying all your bills on time, even if you have boundaries and you're showing up as you should, like even if you're that person, if you're living in a modern society, you're still hurting people. Isn't that crazy? So, I think when we look at the absurdity of some of our thinking, it helps it lose some of its power, and the ways that we've been bound or contained by it, like, almost dissolve. And that's my whole model for, like, freeing people, is to be like, no, like, you already are. It's just your thinking that prevents you from the experience of it. So with the stuff you do or did, let's look at this a little bit more specifically. So, one, I talked about somebody might think that they are, you might notice that let's do transparency and honesty and communication, because I think this is an area where people know, they're able to see where they're not the whole way honest. They're able to see that they want people to be honest with themselves. They're able to see the fear there, the complexity that it creates when you think you can't just be direct. So I think a lot of people have an experience of like, it's like and this is another thing, like, most people are so far from being honest, they don't even know what honest is, and it's not through their own fault. And that's part of this whole coming to acknowledge the awareness, like allowing your awareness to expand to what really is you have to see that most of how you are isn't you. It's just how you've been trained to experience and respond to life. And I've talked about this for some time now, the role that television and film play, or even literature, like the way that the role that they play in developing our communication patterns. And I don't watch any television now. I watch Marvel sometimes, but back in the day, I used to really love Friends and the television show. And I think that one is pretty stereotypical of what our generation picked up at communication dynamic training level, which is basically like, here's the secret that we know, but they can't know. And the whole plot moves around this piece of information that can't be shared. And that's so crazy. It is so crazy. And so we pick up this idea that it normalizes it in some ways, where even if your inclination is to be honest and direct, you have been trained subtly to not do that. And you might have been trained at your family level at this. Okay. So are we bad people? Let's say that line is bad. And I'm sorry, I think this is so funny today, but let's say that line is bad. How many people do you know where they don't feel good inside? They got a whole inner experience going on, and this could be you. And someone's like, hey, how's it going? And they're like, oh, it's good. Stuff they're saying not matching what is real and true, lying, bad person. Even though they might be trying to help somebody else by not putting their stuff on them, or, the absurdity. And again, it's like society has trained you to think that you need to be a good person. And then as part of that good person prerogative, you have, and that might not be the right word, you have all of these things that prevent you, these patterns of behaving that prevent you from ever reaching that. And yet most of the prevention is held below your awareness. And it doesn't even really matter if you're a good person or a bad person, so much as like the experience that you have is like lesser, because you're not really ever comfortable until you've come to see yourself wholly, or you've made space for what is hidden. Because until you make space for what is hidden within you, you're going to be running. And depending on your intensity level, you could run really fast. And so fast that you then would create ripples and troubles for others. And what is crazy is that as we are all expressions of the one thing, there ain't shit in any one of us that isn't in all of us that wouldn't be teased out through circumstances. And people will argue all the time, like, oh, I wouldn't do that, or I would do this. You have inner inclinations. When we're looking at the self, it's so funny, because what you can actually, good morning guys, what you can actually claim as you is not you at all. Can you, like, what you can take pride in and responsibility for? It's so interesting. And there are paradigms, there are levels, there are layers. And so what I'm talking about right now is like one level of self-mastery, self-develop. Beyond that level, things change. Before that level, things are different. But on this one right now, what I'm talking about is if you are identified with your concept of self, which to me is the ego, your idea of yourself. So there is like a self, and then there is the idea of the self. And the idea of the self is never it, because it's the one having the idea. And you can't see what informs and shifts what you perceive or how you perceive it. And so what you're looking at, you're like, oh, this is, but it's how you're looking at that creates this. And so you've got this concept of self that is mutilated by how it's being conceptualized, and then you take this and you say, oh, I'm this. And as part of that, it's like, human design I love is an incredible tool, Gene Keys as well, and human design is like, here's a map of what makes you unique. Here's your map of individuality. And I've done it for over 100 people now, and I feel pretty confident and comfortable. And I've done it for myself for 5 years now. I feel pretty good about saying, like, I think there's something there. Is it the end all be all? No, nothingness. Is it helpful and validating or improving your ability to, like, make space for differences? Absolutely. And with it, you can see, like, the drive behind some of your behavior, and behavior includes mental and emotional experience. Good morning. And and you cannot see that stuff. You cannot see what's, like, driving you, because it's, like, behind you. And so if you're just joining, what I'm unpacking today is the question, am I a bad person? Which is a question people ask themselves privately and or in the background. And if you're just joining, what you missed was, and why I'm so fucking amused today, is that I didn't expect our first stop on this journey of unpacking for me to confirm, like, don't worry, honey, you are. We all are. and yet, like, we're not. So when we're looking at the idea of the self, and basically what I was just saying is, like, everybody kind of thinks, like, oh, I am doing this, I would do this. And thanks, Jess. Sing it, girl. P.S. Congrats on all your bigness right now. It really lights me up to see you shining in those ways. Appreciate you. So we're looking at the self and kind of like what we take credit for, because a lot of this question, am I a bad person, we're using almost all the time. You're kind of like sniffing around other people and other things to be like, oh, see, I'm better than them. I'm a bad person, but I'm a better person than them. And you forget the ways and what you're perceiving, again, how those have already been kind of twisted, meaning when you perceive what somebody else is doing, it's filtered through yourself. And also you're only ever seeing, like, just one facet of that person when they're generally multidimensional. There's a lot more to them, which means, like, we have, am I a bad person? I live in New Orleans. Lots of evidence of the slave trade here. People and plantation, so people owning other people, and they might have been really great fathers. They might have been really great, really brilliant craftsmen, and they owned other people, which is fucking crazy. Isn't that crazy? And so we're looking, and they probably thought they were great people. You know what I mean? So this is what we're looking at, where there is this complexity to all of this thinking, and yet having the unrest, the unsettled piece really drives more unconscious behavior, because we're afraid to find out, am I a bad person? And again, like, if you're just joining, what I said is, don't worry, you are. We all are. And or, like, we're not at the same time. So what I had been trying to say prior to that was, like, your unique chemistry and your unique starting point all influence what kind of is created here and how it moves. And then if what you started with and how you were angled into the world and supported in that growth were healthy, and you then make choices that are good, and you identify then as a good person, it's like you likely think, like, oh, I did this, I'm doing this, I'm making these. And some people are aware of the advantages that they've had. And again, yet even those are still, you could still argue for badness no matter who you are or what you're doing. So that's one thing. And then we're looking at my population, my heart is with people that had, like, a little bit more to deal with than that. Although I love that population as well, because if you are in a position, if that's you and you're in a position of leadership, remember, not everybody was working with what you were working with. And how do you bridge, how do you make the people who, so this, the other half is like, let's say that you had some level, maybe your mom wasn't properly didn't have proper nutrients when you were inside of her belly. Maybe the world that you landed in had emotional chaos. Maybe the school system that you were in had loud noises that unsettled you. Like, there are all of these things, these factors that are external to the person, even if they're internal to the chemistry, that influence who they become, and how they behave. And when we're looking at the concept of self, it usually is derived from what we perceive. So who they are is generally what they think they've done, but they're not that. And that's why, that's like what's so powerful to me in this work, is that if you started in a place where you ended up becoming something you don't like, or you do stuff you don't like, it's not you. It's not you. No more than it is the people who are doing the good stuff. It's not them. It really is just this like magical cauldron of circumstances, and then life came forth as this, life came forth as that. And what I was saying is, like, we forget that underneath all of that, you know, it's kind of like the light of God. Like, there is like the candle within each of us. And thanks for stopping in, Katrina. Bye. Good night. You know, there's the candle within each of us, and the candle then becomes whatever the candle, you know, and there's an element of choice, an element of cultivation of the self, because it's when we're looking at the paradigms, what I'm talking about and being kind of out of control is to a point. And then at that point, when you have sort of the willingness to see things, you can take leadership of them. And yet the only real choice you have is to, as best you can, like, choose God, choose life, choose love. Because again, the things that you're aware of are already filtered. And so let's say that there is a hierarchy of choices, and we'll do them in kind of this color scheme where they run from like dark to light. The circumstances I talked about have already, you know, your inner inclinations, your external, all of your conditioning will have filtered what you perceive as far as your choices. So if yellow is the best choice, you likely don't see yellow. You likely only can pick through these. And so then, is it fair to hold yourself to a standard of choosing something you don't even like believe to be possible or true? And so the choice is always just like, again, like, do I want to choose love? Do I want to choose to believe in myself? Like, there is like a higher choice, and that is our only real choice, because all of the other ones, again, have already been filtered. And I think I've been out here for a while, so I'm gonna wrap this up so that I'll probably do this one in chunks. If you were here in the beginning and you heard me tell you that you're not a good person, nobody's a good person, know that I'm going to take that somewhere that you'll see that it's okay if you don't already, and or you can celebrate it, and or you'll see that, like, there's no good or bad, which is to say, like, you can walk away still feeling good about yourself if you wish, as you should. Light will always escape darkness. True, I was shot by a family member when I was 18, and I've never had a desire to hurt them or anyone for that matter. Thank you for adding that. I think that's pretty intense. That sounds like a pretty extreme experience, and I'm wondering how that ties to some of the other things that you shared in lives this week. As far as what you expect to experience via others. So something, you know, we have these events and some are very subtle. And that one is not subtle at all. But you can have events that are very subtle that influence your perception in ways you can't see, just like I was saying before. We can't perceive how we're perceiving. That's why it's so helpful to work with other people and kind of unsticking yourself, because if you saw, you wouldn't be stuck. All right, so with this question, am I a bad person? Basically, I'm saying, like, it's great that you're allowing, if this is a question that you're entertaining, that's great. That means that you're about to take power in a new way, and power is the same as freedom and responsibility, kind of like all tied together. And isn't that incredible? And I think that there is almost like we're all trekking this way as a culture, and the only choice you really have, again, is to say yes to allowing awareness to light you up, which is, to me, the same as God and life. And that's where we're coming to see that the mind creates problems where there are none. And the problem here, am I a bad person, is created through, again, the conditioning of the idea that there is a good person, and then all of these ways that we're trained to behave that actually hold us apart from hitting that target. And even then, there are like even subtler ones, like I was saying about our impact on the environment, our impact of our individual cell, that it takes a while to really own wholly what you're doing. It takes a minute, because you've been trained, you've been conditioned. And I have a lot of content on self-forgiveness, and that's because I spent a lot of time exploring this. Because if you want to step into your power, the way to get there is through all your shit and through everybody else's shit, to see that it's not really like, oops, like there was nothing here. It's all okay, even what's not okay. Even if I don't think I'm a bad person, it's still good practice to say yes to this, to question, to allow more possibilities. Thank you for asking that. I think that, I think it's helpful. I think it's helpful to allow yourself to invite yourself to be as aware as possible. I think looking for where you might be a bad person will show you stuff and create stuff that maybe isn't helpful, but asking instead, how can I be more aware of myself and my impact, will show you what you need to know in probably a more constructive way. I think that, and I was supposed to be wrapping up, but the exploration of the shadow self and the darkness of humanity is a very interesting and intense leg of the self-mastery journey, because what I was saying a little bit back, and I'm not sure if I tied it all together, I'm going to say I did, but we think that we wouldn't be the bad people. But if we were in the same circumstances, and the circumstances, again, are a sequence of external events in response to an internal orientation or situation, which is like your biochemistry, like if you had those things as the person that's bad, you would be the person that's bad. You see what I'm saying? So there is this element of human nature that if you're on the good side of the line, you think like, oh, because I'm this. No, honey, like, we're all the same. But yours has been shaped in a way that better matches what you think is good. And so it allows for you to feel that way. And what I'm trying to say is, like, there are ways to see that it's all good. And this is, to me, how we integrate and elevate society and humanity. Because if you think that there are bad people, well, fuck, we're never going to get anywhere. You can't. There are people who are in lower levels of density, meaning, or higher levels of density, or under more density, where they have a harder time perceiving their impact. Like I started at the beginning of this, if you really knew you were hurting yourself or others, you wouldn't. Or if you knew there was another way, you wouldn't. Like if you really knew who you were, God, you wouldn't do that. And so any behavior that is not supportive of life and supportive of others is unconscious. And so can you really hold somebody accountable for, or define who they are, rather? Can you define who they are through what they've done in unconsciousness? It's like if somebody's under hypnosis and they do something that's whack, did they do it? You know what I'm saying? And that's kind of what we experience at a culture, because conditioning is hypnosis. And so we've got a bunch, and conditioning has the cultural level, but it also has the personal level, so very unique experience levels. And so when people are doing crazy shit, is it them? You know? And why this work is important to me is that I think that there's so much untapped power and compassion and leadership and people sitting inside of them because they think they're bad people, because they did some whack shit while they were under the hypnosis of their trauma, of their limited ideas through humanity. But honey, like, that ain't you. And it's important to own your behavior. It's important to acknowledge the impact that it's had, but at the same time, it's okay to not be that either. At this point going forward, you don't want to claim that as who you are. You don't have to. And again, that doesn't mean you ignore or act like the choices that you made, even in your unconscious, hypnotized expression, weren't there. It's not that you ignore them. It's that you step into owning what's underneath them, and in which that's the only way to take power. That's the only way to change things, is to acknowledge what was and also what wasn't. And that's like, so I guess like this is when I'm doing this work, I'm thinking like, oh, my X-Men, those are my people who've been doing weird shit with their gifts because they didn't know how to use them. And I like, we're the hope for the world, because that's what I should wear my world shirt for all my podcasts, because we have the capacity to see across the line. I missed your work. Where have I been these recent weeks? Wow, my mind is so expansive right now. Thanks so much for coming in. I was offline for several months with my own shit I was working through, and then some technical difficulties. There's a bunch of stuff on youtube.com/@ShayleeEdwards right now, from the last few months. I hate that I've done so much healing and other people can't look at themselves in the mirror and do their own healing and then go around hurting more people like me, but no more. Yeah, and that's kind of how you interrupt the process, is until you really own your own darkness, until you own your own shit, you will not allow for it in another in a way that you think you can do anything about it. So for me, that looked like passivity was my form of control, and passiveness is as harmful and as much of a lie as as active manipulation. Passivity is manipulation in its own way, and yet people walk around and say like, oh, these people are, aggressive and controlling. And it's like, well, did you tell them? And they're like, oh no, like I can't. Okay, so it's the same thing. It's like the other side. And so until you really like acknowledge your own power, you're gonna think that other people have it. So I think that when we're wielding awareness, it doesn't have to be you're bad, you're wrong, you're unhealed, you're this. It's just very simply like, no, like there doesn't need to be a story to respond to what isn't or what could be. It's acknowledging, like, it's very simple ultimately. It's very simple. All right, I gotta go because this is probably 40 minutes and nobody cares after 2.5. All right, I'll be back on this topic at some point. Everyone have a beautiful day. Thank you so much for coming out.